Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on INC Live. It is our preview of Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou at UFC 260. My name is Carl Bainbridge and his badly receding hairline, and I'm joined as ever by Jon Martian MMA. John, it's a bit of a strange circumstances as to why we're doing this video. We'll explain those in a bit more detail, but thank you for joining us on short notice.
Yeah, no problem, Carl. What's up? Happy to be here. Nice to be
Again.
back on the INC Live channel. Yep. And excited to break down this fight. We got the heavyweights championship fight going down this Saturday. It's going to be a hard fight to predict because all Francis Ngannou fights are, but we'll do our best job to analyze it here coming forward.
Now, we want to put out a little bit of a disclaimer for anybody, because normally we do a full preview of the entire fight card, and we did do that on Sunday for UFC 260. So we did about an hour covering the 4 main card fights, and we all thought everything was fine and dandy when we did that. Somebody ended up messing up the audio. By the time we found that out, it was far too late, and we both agreed we just can't put ourselves through doing that hour once again. But we thought we needed to get something out for this card, especially with it being such a big fight. So we made a gentleman's agreement. We will come back on Tuesday and just break down the main event. So if you are a big fan of Jamie Malarkey or you care what we think about Thomas Almeida, we apologize. But hopefully this goes somewhere to almost offering an apology to you. So we hope you enjoyed this. And as John mentioned, we'll look forward to breaking down what is a big main event.
Yeah, and if you guys are looking to hear some analysis towards the other fights, the prelims, the other main card fights, I'll have my podcast out in a few days here, the Martian MMA podcast, and I'll talk about all the fights on there. So I got you covered, and you can just hear just the thoughts on the main event from me and Carl here coming up here shortly.
And this is a big main event. You can see it on our graphic there. Stipe Miocic is taking on Francis Ngannou, a rematch from their fight at UFC 220, which Stipe won in comfortable fashion. Before we actually get onto that fight, though, I want to talk a little bit about Stipe, because when you look at Stipe's portfolio and you look at the people he's beaten, DC twice, JDS, Verdum, Andrei Arlovski, he can make a strong claim to being the UFC's greatest heavyweight. I wouldn't go as far as to call him the greatest of all time. To me, that's still Fedor. And yet, I feel like despite everything that Stipe has achieved, he doesn't have a mystique surrounding him. I don't know if that's because he lost to Struve early in his career, or whether he's just a normal family man in a cartoon division. But when you look at people like Fedor or even Cain Velasquez, there was an aura surrounding them. It felt like a big deal watching them fight. And even though Stipe is a fantastic fighter, has a truckload of knockouts, and has beaten some fantastic names, he maybe just doesn't get the respect and the appreciation that really he deserves. And I bring this up because we all saw what happened in that first fight. Francis had 2 or 3 minutes where he was going completely gung-ho and looked like he could possibly finish the fight. But from that point on, Stipe utterly dominated. And yet despite that, and despite Francis showing nothing in terms of improving his wrestling, improving his takedown defense, Francis still enters this fight to some bookmakers as the favorite. And you got to wonder, what does Stipe need to do to win over those naysayers?
Yeah, he definitely gets disrespected. You're right about that. I think a lot of it has to do with athleticism, honestly. The best heavyweights are the most exciting heavyweights. You always think of athletic freaks, Brock Lesnar, Fedor, even Ngannou. But Stipe doesn't have that athleticism. He doesn't have that same durability. While Fedor was able to fight a long prime of his career, he fought an insane amount of great heavyweights over in Pride. He had that longevity, that durability, that athleticism that I don't really think Stipe has. So it's been hard for him to kind of rack up consistent wins and get that aura of invincibility about him. And he also had the DC fights, which he kind of looked a little vulnerable in. He obviously lost the first fight by knockout. The second fight, he struggled a lot in. For the majority of the fight, he lost it before turning it around. But the past 2 fights, the ones where he got that comeback in round 4 versus DC, and the one where he beat DC pretty comfortably in the trilogy, really showed how great of a heavyweight he is. A great fighter, one of the best pound for pound in the UFC right now. and he definitely gets disrespected. The odds are closer than the first fight. I think Ngannou was around minus 170, 62% the first time out, and now he's a very slight favorite at around 52, 53%. So the odds are closer this time around, but they are still favoring Francis Ngannou. What do you think about that, Carl? You think that's right, or do you think that's wrong?
I would probably, my mind goes back to what we saw at UFC 220. I just have too many sort of question marks about whether or not Francis has made the improvements to justify being the favourite again. But when you look at what Francis has been doing in those past four fights, I mean, I saw a stat. When you look at the people that he's beaten as well, it was Curtis Blades, Cain Velasquez, Jairzinho Rosenstrike, and JDS. He beat four of them, former champions and title challengers, title contenders, 2 minutes 42 seconds. So you can understand why the bookmakers are so high on him. But my mind always goes back to that first fight. And also as well, when we look at the community post, we posted this on the main page, they're backing Stipe to win this one 76%. So the bookmakers and the punters are sort of differing on who they're favouring for this one.
Yeah, and no disrespect to the INC following, but what did they have Kevin Holland at last week? Was he like 82%, 85%?
81%.
There we go. There we go. Derek Brunson shut that show down. So Ngannou might pull off the upset here. I mean, I feel like it would be an upset, honestly, even though he is the slight favorite in the betting lines, considering how the first fight went. It was competitive for 3 minutes, and then it was domination for the last 22 minutes for Stipe. So I would kind of consider it an upset for him to pull off that knockout here. But looking at the odds again, is the first time around, Ngannou in round one was plus 120. Now it's around plus 240. So there's a significant increase in the round one odds for Ngannou, even though I still think that's his way to win. I don't think he's gotten much better as a fighter. He certainly hasn't shown any wrestling improvements, as you mentioned. So you're really kind of taking a gamble on him because he hasn't shown ability to stop those takedowns. He hasn't shown any really cardio hopes. I mean, he did go the full 15 minutes against Lewis, but that wasn't exactly a good sign from him. So it really matters about how Ngannou approaches this fight. Now, here's a question for you, Carl. Do you think he's going to come out in round one swinging like crazy like he did in the first fight, trying to get that knockout? Or do you think he's going to try to be a little more patient? He's going to be a little more wary of the takedown attempt? How do you see Ngannou's approach? Do you think he's going to be aggressive or passive?
I think we're going to see a middle ground leaning towards cautious because Francis is obviously going to be aware of what happened in that first fight. I rewatched that first fight and especially that first round a couple of times to try and prep myself for this. And the big thing that stood out for me was that Francis did hurt Stipe on a number of occasions in that first round. And it was almost as if Francis realised, okay, he's on the ropes, I'm going to go in charging. And that was when Stipe was able to set up those takedowns, even in the third and fourth rounds. Francis still hurt Stipe on a couple of occasions, but that was when Stipe always went for the wrestling. And I think as well, even though Stipe has always had wrestling in his back pocket, it's not something he always goes to. And I think Francis was maybe a bit caught out that this striker, this primarily a boxer, was choosing to wrestle with him. Now, though, he knows that the takedown is a threat. And I think he's going to be a lot more aware because remember when he fought Curtis Blades first time? He stuffed a lot of Curtis Blades' takedowns, so we know he's capable of doing it. I wonder if that was maybe a factor first time around that he didn't expect it from Stipe.
Yeah, well, I rewatched the fight too, of course, and he did actually kind of defend the first few takedowns. He got taken down with a single leg 20 seconds in. He used his athleticism to stand back up, and then he stuffed a good 2 to 3 takedown attempts and got some punches off. As you mentioned, he hurt him. He was landing some short, glancing, sloppy punches, and they were still hurting Stipe Miocic. And then Miocic was landing clean right hands, and it didn't seem to phase Ngannou at all. So there is a huge durability difference between these guys. Stipe cannot take as much damage as Ngannou can. And there's also the questions of the DC fight. We saw Stipe get his bell rung a little bit in the first fight. Then he fought DC 3 times. And a statistic for you about those fights is he absorbed 252 strikes to the head in those 3 fights. So since the first fight, Ngannou has barely taken any damage, right? I mean, he might have eaten a few punches from Derek Lewis, a few glancing shots in those crazy brawls he had that lasted a minute, but he hasn't really taken any damage. Meanwhile, Stipe has taken a significant amount of damage. He's trained for grueling fights with DC. He went the full 5 hard rounds, so he's had a lot more wear and tear on him since the first fight. And it's really a question of, can he absorb those same shots he did the first time around? Because I don't think that Stipe is going to immediately take Ngannou down. I think that Ngannou's athleticism when he's fresh is going to be hard for him to get flat on the mat. So I do see these guys striking for the first few minutes of this fight. And I just can't trust the defense, the durability of Stipe. I feel like this time we're going to see one of those sloppy glancing shots land, and it's going to put Stipe out. And it doesn't even have to knock him out clean. If you watch a lot of like the Cain Velasquez fight and the Junior Dos Santos fight, sometimes when Ngannou hits you, he just creates these crazy situations where it looks like you're in really bad trouble when you're not even like fully out. Like Junior Dos Santos and Cain Velasquez weren't out, but they were on the ground. And if Ngannou's on top of you, the referee's likely going to step in and call it off. So I do see the knockout happening for Ngannou here. It's not like I'm cheering for it to happen because I like Stipe better. He's clearly the better fighter, the much better grappler. But sadly, I'm going to be going with Ngannou here as my pick.
You made a really good point there when you brought up Francis's durability. I think a big part of the reason why Francis fights in the way that he is, I think it's twofold. We saw Francis try to fight a technician's fight against Derek Lewis, and we all suffered as a result of that. But also as well, because Francis has such confidence in his chin, he can afford to be a little bit wild, a little bit reckless. Like if you watch that Slooper Slow-Mo video that always does the rounds when he fought Rosenstrike, Rosenstrike was pretty much doing everything right. He was like going backwards, he was catching him like 4 or 5 shots. Francis just hit him once with probably the weakest swing of the 5 or 6 and ended up dropping him out cold. So I think in a way, Francis being this sort of wild, reckless fighter is the best way to get the best out of himself.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree. I think if he comes out patient like he did versus Lewis, it's going to be really, really bad for him. I think he's going to get taken down and he likely gets put on his back for long periods of time. We probably see a repeat of the first fight. So he needs to come out. He needs to spam those punches. But as you mentioned, he hurt Stipe the first time a lot of times, but then he would get very overzealous. He would swing big, and that's when Stipe would time his level changes and get those takedowns. So if he has a little bit of an adjustment, and when he lands a punch, if he can stay a little more disciplined and not swing wild and get off balance and give up opportunities for takedowns, then I think he probably can find that kill shot here. But it really is a gamble. It really is speculating because Ngannou fights don't, follow reason, don't follow rationale. I picked Rosenstrike to beat him, honestly. I picked Rosenstrike to weather the early storm, for him to be the better striker. And even though he probably had the better striking technique, that didn't matter. It didn't matter because we saw the better technician landed some counter shots on the back foot. Ngannou didn't care. He marched forward. He landed those lunch boxes of fists he has, and he put him out cold. So I feel like you kind of got to throw reason and rationale out the window. It seems like Stipe will take him down and do the same thing he did again. But I'm not picking it to do so. I actually had a friend who said, I think whoever wins this fight will look like a massive, massive favorite. It'll either look like Ngannou killing him in a round or Stipe doing the same thing he did the first time. So it's a very polarizing fight. I bet there's a lot of people going to be on different sides here.
I think it's a really fascinating fight as well for that reason. What I do like about Francis, which I have seen from the 2 or 3 minutes he's been in action, he made a big mistake first time around. He bulked up far too much for that fight. So I have been happy to see him looking a lot leaner than he has done, but I think that's going to help his conditioning. You make concerns about Stipe's durability, and I think those are viable concerns, bearing in mind he's also 38 years old. But the other thing that Stipe has, which a lot of these other heavyweights don't, good head movement.
Yeah, you did see him slip on a lot of those punches the first time. But again, I don't know if like better technique is the way to beat Ngannou because slipping those shots, all Francis needs is a centimeter of space to land that shot, and the margins for Ngannou to win are much larger than Stipe. Stipe needs likely multiple takedowns, a lot of top control time. He needs to tire Ngannou out. He needs to get him in the later rounds. Ngannou needs one punch, so the margins for winning are much tighter for Stipe. I don't even know if I said that right, but you know what I'm saying. You can take over for a little bit, Carl.
Someone made a comparison which I think is perfectly apt. This is basically Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder. You've got one guy who is a substantially far better technician, but he needs to fight an entire duration absolutely perfectly to get this done, whereas his opponent just needs one shot. And I think we're going to see the same thing again. You're leaning towards Ngannou, you're sort of going for the percentages and thinking he just needs that one shot and he's more than likely going to get it done. I'm just so convinced by what we saw in the first fight that I see Stipe getting it done again. I think Stipe is smart enough and wily enough to survive that early onslaught, and we're going to see a repeat of what we did back in 2018.
Yeah, I mean that's a respectable pick. Like I said, the footage is there. The footage backs that pick up. The technical analysis behind the fight, I think, backs up a Stipe pick. But I'm going with a little bit of an anomaly, I guess. And I do have a bet on this fight. It is Ngannou KO round one at plus 240, and plus 240 means it's close to. Let's do the calculation. 10 divided by 34, 30%. So if they fight three times, does Ngannou knock him out in round one of those times? I think so. So I'm happy to make that bet here at plus 240. And I have it tracked on my official bet page. You can find that on my Twitter profile, my YouTube channel. That's where I track all my official bets. So, like I said, I would be happy to see Stipe pull off the victory. He's the better fighter. He's a great guy, cool personality. And I think it would be good for the sport to see him win. I would like to see him retire soon. I mean, we just saw Blades lose. I don't think that I don't think Lewis is a big challenge for Stipe. So I would like to see him retire on a win. So I wouldn't be mad at all to see him get this victory here Saturday.
And of course, the winner of this one also gets a big John Jones-sized shadow waiting in the wings.
Yeah, John Jones ain't ever fighting at heavyweight. I can tell you that right now. It's all a ruse. That guy has. I mean, I just saw they removed Khabib from the pound for pound rankings. And now John Jones is the best pound for pound fighter in the world, which is crazy because he hasn't won a fight in 2 years, and his last two opponents he's lost to have lost all of their fights recently. So. John Jones' stock is in the toilet. He's not fighting at heavyweight. I'm sure he'll pop up this weekend to make himself stay relevant like he always does. But he's a weasel who's always going to kind of weasel his way into the limelight when people are talking about other fighters. So, yeah, ignore John Jones this weekend. It's about Ngannou and Stipe. And that's really all it's about because this card is weak. We lost the Volkanovski-Ortega title fight. And now we're left with just a few good fights left for this pay-per-view.
What do you mean, Jessica Penne versus Hannah Goldie?
Yeah, I've been waiting 4 years for Jessica Penne's return. I'm eagerly awaiting that one. Same with Abu Azaitar. Hasn't fought in 2 or 3 years or something like that, and is fighting on this card.
But that is our breakdown of Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou. Just to clarify, I'm going to go Stipe by decision. You are going...
Ngannou knockout round one.
We'll see which one of us is right. It's very rare that we actually differ in terms of who we actually think is going to win this one. But that is our breakdown of Stipe versus Francis. Once again, we do apologise that we didn't have a full preview show for you guys. Hopefully this is some kind of compromise for you. Don't worry, this isn't going to be a permanent fixture. UFC 261, we will be doing a full preview show for that one, including 3 title fights, a full crowd in attendance, a rematch which... depending on which way you look at it, some people maybe aren't too enthusiastic about, others are really looking forward to it. 2 great women's matches as well. That one is worthy of a full hour-long show. I'm sure you're going to be back for that one, John?
Yep, sounds good.
Yep.
Looking forward to it.
That's our preview of UFC 260 Stipe versus Francis. Who do you think is going to win this one? Please post your comments in the description below. Also, subscribe to the channel, post it, share it with all your friends. Anything that you can do to support us is greatly appreciated. And the same for Jon as well. He's going to have a full breakdown of the entire card on his channel. Thank you very much once again. This is the INC. Thank you for watching.